This recording was originally a live panel discussion which took place at the Zurich Scale-Up Cruise back in September 2022.
You don't want to run out of money. Most companies, they don't go out of business because they're bad companies. They go out of business because they run out of cash. If you already have a customer base that you don't really think about just customers but partners, there's a lot you can do with that, right? Because a lot of the startups I meet in Europe, and particularly Switzerland, have an amazing opportunity to grow accounts. So you go in with a smaller deal and then eventually you kind of develop these deals into larger deals. And those partners, if they love your product, they want to keep you as a vendor or as a partner. So build your partnership, build your customer base, don't run out of cash.
Welcome to the Swisspreneur Show, a podcast about startup stories and learnings from experienced entrepreneurs. Here's your host, Sylvan.
Okay, everyone, we are starting the panel discussion right now. Please come and join us here on the lower deck. It's my pleasure to introduce you to three special guests. I'm going to introduce them one by one. The first guest I'm going to introduce you to is Philipp Stauffer, co-founder and partner at FYRFLY Ventures. You're a venture investment firm with a focus on data and intelligence, as you put it on your website. And I wonder what actually motivated you to switch from being a founder yourself to becoming an investor?
I was fighting at the door for the blue and the red dot because I'm a founder too. There's always this perception that once you become an investor, you're on the dark side and not Skywalker anymore. And that's not really the case because we feel as founders too, as the founders do, and we hope we're good partners to help build companies. And so, but the motivation was really, I was a founder as well, and eventually I realized I just love to work with smart people. And as an investor, you can work with a lot of smart people. That was really the key behind it. So growing up in Switzerland and then moving to California, I just felt like there's a lot we can do to help help build companies across the Atlantic. And so that's what we started to focus on.
Fantastic. Thank you for joining us here. Our second panelist is Myriam Locher. You're the co-CEO at Locity, the workplace analytics solution. But before that, you actually scaled DeinDeal, I think one of the most well-known Swiss startups. And you also built Start Global, the biggest conference organized by students. And I just wonder, if you look back at the last 2 decades, how the Swiss ecosystem evolved, what is one positive thing that you see as a trend? And what is one thing that we still have work to do that we should improve?
So obviously what is painful about the Swiss ecosystem is the sizes that we can do when we do bigger investment rounds. So we have a lot of peers and friends going into the situation. So for Locity, the bigger rounds are about to come. But for many of us, when we target a larger Series B or a Series C, it means obviously we need to reach out to US investors. And that is something that has been much worse 15, 20 years ago than it is today, but it's still an issue. And it's, it's very unfortunate because our IPs move to the other side of the Western world, which they shouldn't. What is great about Switzerland is the level of credibility that we still have out there in the world. And we are somehow perceived as being honest and thorough and precise. And I think if you live up to that, we're actually doing a good job.
Great points. Thank you for joining us today. Last but not least, I know you saw Chris, the co-founder and CEO of Beekeeper, on the program, but he couldn't make it. So we have an equally good replacement with Flavio, the other co-founder and CIO. Flavio, thank you so much for jumping in at such last minute.
It's a pleasure.
So quick intro. Beekeeper is a mobile platform that is the single point of contact for all your workforce, basically. And I wonder, with your growth journey, why is Switzerland the right home base for you?
As you say, it's our home base. We were founded here. We have a really strong brand in the market, both with our customers, many great customer referrals, great market traction here, but then also with the talent. We have great access to talent here with our brand. And what else? Access to chocolate, I guess.
good office
but
perks.
I'd say also great access to capital in Switzerland. We see bigger funds, and there's also funds that can do later stage rounds, and that's very attractive to us.
Great. Thank you also for being here today. You mentioned capital is one part. That's one aspect that we're going to talk about today. We also talk about growth and, of course, also how to sail the uncertain waters that you currently see with the current market conditions. So I just want to address that first question to you, Flavio. In these market conditions, things change rapidly. It's harder to raise money. It might be more difficult to acquire clients because they stop their budgets. How do you, with Beekeeper, navigate through these uncertain territories and uncertain waters?
Great question. I think it's probably a question many startups are dealing with in the ecosystem. Growth, we are a growth company, we are a scale-up company, so that's not going to change. We are still growing, we still will grow. What is changing, though, is sort of how far out our profitability or break-even will be. So that's something that we have pulled out a plan to see how can we pull it closer, how can we be a break-even sooner, and that's definitely something how we are navigating that situation.
So profitability is more important to be independent from investors or need less money. What strategic options do you then lay out there? Do you think about hiring slower? Do you think about cutting costs on some edge? What is the strategic playing field that you focus on?
For us, it's a lot about efficiency or productivity. So we are 210 people, but how can we now, with the same headcount, start to carry more productivity, more revenue? So it's a lot about, how can we capture more value with our customers with the same headcount and much more automation.
Great. And maybe a question to you, Philip. What do you advise your portfolio companies if they say profitability becomes more important, they want to extend their runway? What should they focus on from your experience? What do you tell them to do?
You don't want to run out of money. That's, I think, number one. So you want to, and nobody really knows how long the uncertainty will be in the market, right? I mean, we were in a similar situation when COVID started, and we were lucky that it became a V-shaped recovery. I don't think many people believe in a V-shaped recovery now with everything that is going on. And so as a founder, I think you just have to make sure that, or a management team, you have to make sure that you don't run out of cash. That's the worst. And most companies, they don't go out of business because they're bad companies. They go out of business because they run out of cash. And then somebody will take advantage of it and buy the IP and do all kinds of nasty stuff. So don't do that. That's number one. And then I think the other thing is just work with if you already have a customer base, that you don't really think about just customers, but partners. There's a lot you can do with that, right? Because a lot of the startups I meet in Europe, and particularly Switzerland, have an amazing opportunity to grow accounts. So you go in with a smaller deal, and then eventually you kind of develop these deals into larger deals. And those partners, if they love your product, they want to keep you as a vendor or as a partner. They don't want you to shut down your product because they love it, right? So be creative. There's a lot of creativity that comes into place. But the key is really not to run out of cash. And the funny thing is about the venture industry, last year, never ever was funds raised, never ever as much like the amount of cash that they raised last year. And now it's kind of sitting on the sidelines and everything slowed down. Everybody realized that kind of the fundraising takes longer. You call investors and you don't get calls back. By the way, same for us. When we raise funds, it's harder now from LPs. They also sit on the sidelines. And so all of that just has to kind of a little bit fall in place for everybody. So build your partnership, build your customer base, don't run out of cash.
Good points to remember, yeah. Myriam, I also wonder for you as a co-CEO at Locity, what do you focus on? Because as a startup, you usually want to grow as quickly as possible. Is now the current crisis, if we can call it that way, is that a bad time to grow as a company?
There is an honest way to answer that, a very unsexy way to answer that, and there is something that sounds more, about learning and growth and all of that stuff that we hear about on stages. So the very honest answer, it's crap. It sucks. And at the same time, when you suffer, you can do something with that. But you need people in a team, and that includes the founders, the leadership team, and everybody in the team that works together with you as much as it does involve your investors. Just that guy happens to be one of ours. So in that moment, it proves if you have the right people around you or if you don't. And it requires a very special leadership skill to go through a phase like that, acknowledging how hard it is, not sugarcoating that. And then say, okay, now as we are forced to focus, not because we enjoy it or because it's healthy. It's healthy, and when you look back, it was all super healthy, right? When we do our investors pitches, yes, we bootstrapped and we're super efficient, and yes, we are. But to acknowledge that how to get there is so hard, and then you need to find a way how to help your company, how to help your team to re-energize. And while we're focusing bootstrapping and doing all of these smart partnership moves, which we do, taking care of your people. If you forget about them, your company will literally fall apart.
What do you exactly do there to take good care of your people in these challenging times?
Well, different things. It sounds cheesy, but number one, you need to listen. And that is hard because no one has time for anything, right? So we are all busy fundraising, closing deals, establishing or implementing the change that we designed in a newly structured bootstrap company. We're doing all of that. And because the ideas are so great and because we're so focused now, we just think people are okay with that. But you need to stop and actually dedicate time to listen to people. How do they perceive this? So what we also did is we changed our incentive system. Our salary system is turned upside down. What motivated in other times doesn't motivate now. And money is energy, so you need to acknowledge that, right? So that's true for a company, it's true for a human being. So all of these aspects need mind space and time and the skill to do it.
Flavia, a follow-up question for you on that topic. When crisis hits, do you also see a shift in market needs where you suddenly unlock new growth potential that you didn't realize or capitalize before?
I'd say especially in the initial phase when COVID hit, many businesses were freaking out. How do I reach all my workers, all my workforce? They don't read email. So that was a big tailwind for us initially. And then at the same time, our customers, many run hospitality businesses, hotels, restaurants. So that was crumbling. They were laying off lots of staff, especially markets like the US. So yeah, I think what was great for us that we not rely on single industries, but work with different industries. Some actually profiting from COVID, like logistics and so on. So where we could expand accounts, but then others, obviously, we help with relief, with subscription payments, just to actually support them in those difficult moments with their workforce.
So it was really industry specific, and thanks to your broad base, you were a bit more diversified than maybe other startups.
Yes, I think we had a good path through our COVID.
How was that for you, Myriam, with Locity? I mean, people are now going slowly back to the offices, right? Did you see any change in your growth patterns or growth focus?
Yeah, completely. So we are clearly among those who were hit very hard during COVID. But it seems that we're going to be one of the winners of the after-COVID period. So before the market education was so okay. You know, sometimes I recall the time when I was working at Dine Deal and we had to explain people how e-commerce works. It was a bit of the same for Locity because we are measuring utilization data and all of the data that has to do with the behavior of employees. But then we needed to explain people why that matters. Now that hybrid work is a reality, people sit on enormous amounts of corporate real estate. They cost a fortune of money. Cost saving doesn't need to be explained. And the third big bucket is ESG. So when you're heating up a 40 floor, 80 floor, especially impressive when you're in cities like New York, and you look at these high buildings and you imagine 15% of that building is actually occupied, but you're heating and cooling and lighting and cleaning all of that. That's ridiculous. So we experienced the beautiful case that major global corporates call us up and say, hey, listen, Myriam, We have a building in Hong Kong, and the footprint of that building is a disaster. And I need to do something about it. Can you please help? And that's a situation that we would never have encountered before.
So yeah, there is room for additional growth, absolutely.
This episode was co-produced by Holy Code, your go-to partner for all software development needs. From proof of concept to highly complex software, to building nearshore teams or delivering the optimal ERP solution, Holy Code is what you need. They're experts in startup development and have helped many of our former guests supercharge their technology and make the world a better place, one line of code at a time. So if you're looking for support with scaling your tech product, head over to holycode.com and get started today. That's holycode.com.
Philip, we hear it often, right, these days. It's very tricky for startups to raise money. And I wonder, just from the investor's perspective, how do you as a startup convince an investor just like you to invest money in these very uncertain times versus investing more in your existing portfolio companies?
Well, so investors, they're always looking for opportunities. You have to understand, investors, they get their money from somebody else. And that somebody else wants to see capital deployed in a smart way, right? So it's not like there's no investments happening. However, like if you look at the statistics, Q2 had a 22% decline, I think, of early stage investments, which in the US is like Series A and Bs actually, right? 22%. And put that in perspective, it was the biggest drop since 2000, at least since 2010. Except for when COVID started, but it very quickly recovered. And so capital is there. It's not like funds don't have capital. It was never, ever as much raised. So I think there will be... VCs can only hold out so much and they have to start deploy capital. So it's not like this will last forever. So that's why I'm saying, like, if clearly there has a little bit a defocus on growth. If you had a company that would grow less than 100%, at least in the US, you were like not even making the top 20 list of a large top-tier VC, and you wouldn't even get a meeting. Now I think you get a meeting, particularly if you can prove that the rule of 40, for example, so your balance between growth and managing your cost and your expenses is in a healthy shape. Suddenly that matters more. So educate yourself about those trends and how investors kind of shift a little bit. Like a lot of VCs are also behaving like sheep in a herd. They all run after each other. And so exploit that a little bit, right? As a founder.
But this really goes along what Flavio said at the beginning, right? You focus on profitability, so this is also a more important metric now for investors.
It doesn't even have to be profitability, right? Like profitability, of course, is at the end of the day, eventually you need to prove the case that you can make money as a company. But it has to be a more balanced ratio. Like 3 years ago, you could just raise a crazy amount of money at a crazy multiple and just waste money and nobody will care. Now, obviously, you don't raise money anymore with that proposition. You change, right? And as an entrepreneur, if you understand that shift in mindset and you keep building your relationship with your customer and you keep executing and you have a plan so you see the end of the tunnel, that sometimes requires tough decisions like laying off some people, like extending the runway, like make compromises on valuations and things like this. But that's my advice. Like many of the VCs you talk to are also entrepreneurs, right? I'm also an entrepreneur. I need to raise my cash too. And I'm in a similar position. That's why I have 2 dots, right? But the community or the ecosystem itself, the ecosystem of entrepreneurs and investors and everybody else who plays in it just needs to get through this crisis in order to go to the next stage of growth. And it's always the same situation. It's the flavors of, is growth more important versus a balanced ratio between profit and growth is just shifting from time to time. So
now I'm really interested because you have 2 C-level entrepreneurs here and you as an investor. I also want to talk a bit more about how is it different to raise money in a bear versus a bull market. Maybe starting with you, Flavio. When you think about the valuation, do you see a big difference there compared to raising now in these days versus a few years ago?
I think there was a big shift end of last year. I think last year was crazy. You saw the rounds, everyone was doing higher rounds, like crazy valuations. So it's definitely different to raise capital this year around. Yeah, I think that's just a summary.
Myriam, when you talk to potentially new investors or investors in general, do you see that they take longer to make decisions or that they take longer to respond and get back to you because of the different times now?
Well, not necessarily. It's not that the VC world is dried up. They still have money. They're a bit more, maybe challenging to convince. But the good thing is, we're in the business of selling, right? So he's selling to his own LPs. We are selling to our investors and our customers. So at the end of the day, that's relationship management. And we know that the people we talk to, in their minds, it's possible to say yes to a crazy valuation and to say yes to some, weird, huge ideas. We know it's the same people. They're just a bit more tensed. So what that does is it requires for you to be smarter at arguing. But it's a good thing if you know how to do it. So it doesn't scare me if that's a sub-question of what you are asking.
For you, Phillip, do you spend more time on due diligence or looking at the deal before the crisis?
Actually, for me, it feels like the job is much easier because entrepreneurs who were just there because they feel like it's fun and trendy and I want to start a company, but it's not really a mission. All of these entrepreneurs are gone, so it's easier to find like good entrepreneurs, I feel like. So that's different. And then one thing I always feel like when I found the companies before I started FYRFLY, you have to put yourself into the shoes of the VC, which I think entrepreneurs often do not, right? They're like, oh, I just need to get that cash and get going, right? But if you think about the situation today, last year in Q4, I saw one of our companies raised at a 27x ARR, which was considered low, right? Was considered low.
That's crazy.
Because their three main competitors raised at over 100x ARR. They had 15 million in revenue in ARR and raised at 1.5 billion. So think about the funds that invested in Q4 in that round that now that company will have to raise again within the next 24 months. And I can guarantee you in 24 months we'll not be in a situation where funds will pay that type of craziness, right? So how will that fund now return good money to their investors? Most likely it's not going to happen. So there was this herd mentality of VC funds trying to get into these deals when these valuations were so high. And I'm pretty much saying now, like the vintages, which is usually the year a fund got started, so vintage 2018, 19, 20, 21, we'll hear some horrible stories, right? Of funds not returning cash to their investors, and all of that has to be digested, right? And so, as an entrepreneur, always think about the other side too. Which situation are they in? How can you make them win? Like you think about your employees. How can you make your employees win? It's all kind of connected.
That sounds that down rounds are a real threat to the businesses these days. Is that something that you worry about, Myriam? Are you concerned about a potential down round?
It's my job to be concerned about that. So yes. Does it create sleepless nights? No. Because it's my job to avoid that. And it's one of the parameters that I'm measured by. And there might be, for those who had an extremely crazy valuation, there is an unavoidable situation that they're going to run into this. I see our position very different. Yet we need to acknowledge the market and, what the pandemic did to us and to others. That's all. I think it all comes down to, look into each other's eyes and on an eye level have a conversation about what's going on and what is, driving you from a VC side and what's driving us. And at the end of the day, this is supposed to be a partnership that should lead to a 10x exit somewhere. So if these are the times where you prove as a VC how you see the world and how you see the startups that you're supposed to support. And if I have someone in front of me who just tells me how I'm not justified for the value that I think I have, then maybe that's the wrong VC, right? And that doesn't mean that it's not, obviously it's hard, but it comes down to a partnership. And my experience is startups who suffer in these times also suffer because their investors are not supportive, not financially, but just with their experience and how they behave. And it's the time for us to choose the money wisely. And that's a very healthy thing to do.
And also sounds like a position of strength, exactly where you want to be in these days.
Well, I see it that way. Others might see it differently. And I can tell you in a few months how it turned out, right? But this is how I position our company when we pitch.
Start with you, Flavio. What is one advice that you would give to Swiss startups right now in this moment of time?
Really focus on the customer and the problems that they have and solve them really well.
Philip, what is your one-sentence close?
Don't overhype Silicon Valley. I think Europe caught up with a lot of really interesting funds and VCs, and don't always look to the US. I think that's a mistake we make as Europeans sometimes. The world has changed a lot, and I think it will continue to change. That would be my thing. Like, see the world as a world and not just as I have to go there right now. Right?
Myriam, what is your last sentence of today?
Well, I will dare to quote one of the key players of our team who keeps saying, you can't climb a mountain when you pretend it's not there. So when you want to go out from a position of strength, out of a crisis, you need to acknowledge what's right in front of you and then take step after step after step, going up that mountain to get to the other side. That needs perseverance. That needs a lot of honesty and humbleness. That needs a new combination of self-confidence and clarity. So, from a human perspective, these are awesome times.
I love that. Before we wrap up, menu is coming up, the main course in a few minutes. And I would also like to thank our sponsors again, Swisscom Ventures, Six, MML Legal, and UBS for making that event possible. Myriam, Flavio, Philip, thank you so much for joining the panel. And everyone, enjoy the evening. Thank you for joining us.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, you can support us by rating our show on Apple Podcasts. This way, we can reach an ever-growing number of aspiring entrepreneurs.